Hello everyone, it's Shannon here for Honeybee Stamps. In this video, we're going to create these two rainbow plaid cards using the new Buffalo Plaid stamp and Buffalo Plaid Builder stencil set. We're going to start with the Buffalo Plaid stamp. This is a large 6x6 stamp, great for your backgrounds. But the first thing I'm going to do is kind of create a little template here so it's very easy for me to get the Buffalo Plaid design exactly where I want it on an A2 panel. I have a large sheet of scratch cardstock and I just positioned it here in my MISTI. It just needs to be larger than your 6x6 stamp. This is actually 6.5 by 8.5, so it fits perfectly into the bed of an original MISTI. Then I just positioned the stamp onto the panel, and now I'm just going to quickly ink it up in some black ink. It doesn't matter what color ink it is as long as you can see it, and it also doesn't have to be a perfect impression. So I just quickly stamped this once so I can see the design. I was just having a hard time seeing which areas were open and which areas were solid, and I knew I wanted to have the solid squares on the edges of my panel. So that's why I created this template, just so I could make sure I got this Buffalo Plaid exactly where I wanted it on my A2 panel. So now I'm just tracing where I want my panel to go. I used an A2 panel of grid acetate to help me figure out where I wanted my A2 panel to go, and then I traced it and then added some tape runner to it so my A2 panel of white cardstock can stick to it. So I just popped it into that rectangle, added some anti-static powder, and now I'm going to ink it up with VersaMark ink. Once I stamp my panel, I'll then remove it I'm just using a little Cricut spatula here, but an X-Acto knife would work well. And then I'm going to pour on some embossing powder. Here I'm using black embossing powder, but I do create two cards with this technique, one with black embossing powder and one with white. But the black one is just a little bit easier for you guys to see what I'm doing on camera. So I just poured on the powder and then heat set with my heat tool. Now I'm going to move on to ink blending. So the Buffalo Plaid Builder stencil set has two stencils. We're going to only use the striped stencil for today's cards. I'm going to start by placing the stencil down so that the stripes are horizontal, and I'm going to make sure that the solid areas of the stencil, the areas with the plastic, those stripes are over the solid little squares in the Buffalo Plaid print. Once I have that stencil in place, I'll then grab a couple pieces of painter's tape and place it down to hold the stencil. Now there are 7 stripes in this stencil, and I picked 7 colors, and I'm going to start with my lightest color in the rainbow, which is yellow, and I just counted down where that would be, so that's the 4th stripe down, and I'm just going to start by ink blending that yellow. Then I'll move on to my next color here, which is an orange, and I started with my lightest color because if I pick up any of that residual ink on the stencil, I'm only picking up a light color, which won't impact my next shade that I'm blending, which is darker. So if I picked up any of that yellow and then I blended with the orange, I'm not going to get any kind of weird color transfer, like starting to make a strange, like a green or something. So, but you could also clean in between your colors if you're concerned. You can just kind of take a little baby wipe and wipe down the plastic areas of the stencil where that residual ink is if you're concerned about kind of mixing your colors together over your cardstock. So I just cleaned my stencil, cleaned my tape and my work surface, and now I'm going to rotate the stencil around so that the stripes are vertical this time, and again place those plastic areas of the stencil over the solid areas in the Buffalo Plaid design. There are only 4 stripes when we turn the stencil vertically, so I've narrowed my rainbow down and I'm only going to use my red, orange, yellow, and teal color for this section of ink blending. Again, I'm going to start with my lightest color, so I'm starting with my yellow again, and I just counted down where I wanted that yellow to go and started there, and then I'm going to continue to work my way through my rainbow. Now I do want to note that I am using dye inks, and that is important for today's technique in cards because we are layering these inks, and dye inks are transparent as opposed to pigment inks or even oxides. They're much more opaque, and the beauty of this card or this technique is that these inks colors are layering on top of each other and creating a new color. This is basically color mixing with inks and ink blending. So it's kind of and it yields these really beautiful subtle color changes, and I think that's why this plaid is so pretty. I'm not going to move on to creating the sentiment. I have the Friend honey cuts here. I went ahead and die cut 4 friends out of white cardstock. I used the linear word die for that. And now I'm going to adhere 2 of them together, so I create 2 sets of stacked friend. So I'm just going to use some liquid glue, place it all over the top of that first die cut, and adhere the second to it. Now I'm going to repeat this process for the other pair, and now I'm going to adhere one of my sets on top of this vellum shadow, which I also die cut using one of the dies from the Friend Honey Cuts die set. And again, I'm going to use my liquid adhesive on the back side and adhere that. And then I'm going to go ahead and adhere the little dot for the eye. I'm going to stack 2 on top of each other, just like the friend sentiment. And then I'll turn it over, and this is where I'm going to adhere that second set of stacked friend. And I just added liquid glue right to the back side of the vellum, right directly behind where the white die cuts are, so that glue is hidden. And this basically sandwiches the vellum between 2 stacked layers of cardstock, and that's going to give that vellum a little bit more lift and make it a little bit more opaque, and just help to separate from that plaid background, which can be a little bit busy. I'm now going to quickly stamp the rest of my sentiment. I have the Friend stamp set, just heat embossed Miss You in white onto some black cardstock, trim that down, and now I'm going to add some more lift to this sentiment. So I have 3 little tiny pieces of white cardstock that I just hand cut with scissors, and I stack them on top of each other, and then I'm going to adhere them to the bottom portion of my sentiment. This is going to match basically, or mimic, the thickness of my stacked cardstock for the die cut word friend, and I'll give it a little bit more because I'm doing 3, just to help it go over that vellum layer just a little bit. I could have used foam tape instead, but I didn't want this to be too bulky and stick out too much farther from the word die. So I'm now just adding liquid glue to the backside of my friend and the backside of Miss You and adhering them onto the card front, and that will actually complete the card. I'll now hold my card up to the camera so you can get a good look at this background. I'm really pleased with how this turned out. I love the subtle changes in color by layering those dye inks on top of each other, and this was just a really fun kind of different idea by combining the stencil with the stamp set, and I'm really pleased with how it turned out. And this is a different look than you would get if you were to have ink blended without the stencil, just 7 different colored dye inks. It would have been more of a gradation. This is a little bit more layered look. And here is the white one here. Same process as the black. I just used white embossing powder instead, but all the rest of it is the same. I hope you guys enjoyed today's cards and video. If you'd like any more information on the products I use, please head over to Honeybee Stamps. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.